no ngā te korokoro i te wahapu te hokianga. Hoi nō rā, he nui tonu ngā whakaaro, ka tae tātou te whakatakoto, te whakapuaki mo te mātauranga Māori. He taonga nui tini, e kōrero tia nui tiana i te motu whānui, i ngā whare ako i te tangata, i ngā whare hauora, i rungi o tātou marae, i ngā whare runanga. He nui tonu ngā wāhi kei reira tēnei kupu te mātauranga Māori e kōrero tiana. E wānanga tiana. I runga no hoki i te tūmanako, i runga no hoki i te mōhio, he nui ngā hua i roti te taonga nei o te mātauranga Māori. Noera, ko tino tahuri tātou o te iwi Māori ki te kimi o nā huatanga, ki te wānangi o nā huatangi o nā hua. Kia ki te hoki pehe nei te mātauranga Māori e whakatinana tiai i nei rangi, i ngā rangi katoa mu te ororo. He taonga i ngā rā ka pahe moaki nei, i nei rangi tonu nei pēr, e pēhiana tōna tū i rungi te mato te whenua. I whakakinotia i roti te whakaaro te tangata i ngā rangi ko pahe moaki nei. Hoi anō rā, nō muri nō mai pēr i te tau ko tahi mano i warau waru te kau. Ko tino tahuri te ngākau o te iwi Māori, ki te whai atu, ki te whāwhai te taonga nei o te mātauranga Māori. E tika ana tātou whai atu. Nā koe hoki ko tōku ngākau nui, taro hoki o tāku wānanga haere ngā āhuatanga o te mātauranga Māori. Nā, tētahi mea hoki, tēnei kupu te mātauranga Māori āko hou tonu nei. Kaui tēnei kupu i tino mōhio tia i te wā taku pāpa e tamoriki ana, i te wā taku tupuna kuia e tamoriki ana, ka rera tau i tino rongo i tēnei kupu e kōrero tia ana. I wainga nui a rātou, i o rātou pakeke, i o rātou whānau, i o rātou hapu, i o rātou iwi. Nā taku rangahautanga nō muri mai te tau ko tahi mano i warau waru te kau. I tīmata, i tupu ai te kōrerotanga, i tupu ai te whainga o te take ki kōrero tia tēnei, ki whakapuakina tēnei kupu. Nā, mea nau ko te take, ki taku whakaaro ko te take i tupu ai te kōrerotanga o te kupu nei, ko e tērā te wāhi tīmata i te whakahaere ngā kōhanga reo, taino ki ngā whare wānanga. Ko e hoki te wāhi i kōkiri tiai te kreme mo te reo Māori, te whakatūnga o ngā reo rangi a Māori, te taura whiri, te māngai pāho. Nō e rā tau, nō muri mai te tau ko tahi mano i warau waru te kau, i tupu ai te take kia puta tēnei kupu i a tātai. Engari, hoi no aha ko he hou te kupu nei, e hāngai ana ki etahi taonga o namata no atu nei. Ngā taonga tawhito, ngā taonga o tātou tupuna. Nā aha ko kei te aho tauhou tonu te kupu nei, engari e hāngai ana ki etahi taonga o namata no atu nei. Nā koe tātou e whai atu nei, e whakahua nei tēnei kupu i te mātauranga Māori, koe hoki tātou e whai nei i te mātauranga Māori i nei rangi nei. No te tau ko tahi mano i warau iwa te kauma rima te tau, i tohu ngai au i taku pāpā e whatarangi winiata kia tuahau hei kai hautu mo te mātauranga Māori i te wāna o Raukwa. Ko te tohu mātauranga i tukuna mai ai ki au, ko te Master of Mātauranga Māori. Nei, tērā ka tau i te mea ko au te kai hautu o tērā tohu mātauranga, Master of Mātauranga Māori, ko te tikanga ia kia māra māu, heha tēnei, te tikanga o tēnei kupu te mātauranga Māori, heha tēnei taonga te mātauranga Māori. Nei, tērā wā, kare kau au i tino mōhio ki tērā kupu. Kare au tino marama ki tērā kupu, e ahua tau hou tērā kupu ki au. Ko te wāhi e marama ana ki au, e mohi anau ki te whakapapa, ki te karakia, ki te tikanga ki te aharani, ingari ko te kupu nei o te mātauranga Māori. E ahua hou ki au i tērā wā, ko tahi mano i warau i te kaumā rima te tau. I tahuri au ki te kimi i etahi whakamarama, kore au ki te etahi whakamarama mo te kupu nei, kare kau te kupu mātauranga i roto i te papakupu a te Wiramu, kare kau i tāia i roto i ngā tuhi ngā tūpuna, i ngā poka pēra i ngā motetea, ngā mahianga tūpuna, e rā poka au tātou tupuna, te paipera tapu kare kau i reira, ngā tuhi ngā tupuna pēra ia māteni re whiwhi mā āwai rānei, e miona tiki tū āmi ora pio, mohi rua tapu, e nei tupuna rongonui nei mo te tuhi ngā mātauranga o tērā wā. Kare kau tērā kupu e maua nei reira. Nā reira au e whakapai ai, kāti ko te kupu nei mātauranga Māori noi nei whakatupuranga, no tōku whakatupuranga, no te whakatupuranga o taku pāpā pēa, i timata i te kororotanga o te kupu nei, engari hāngai ana ki etahi taonga o namata no atu nei. Nā reira, i koina pēr hei timatanga mā tātou, tēnei wāhanga, whakatakoto i te i whakarohi te reo Māori, mo te mātauranga Māori. Tuarua, ko tētahi kaupapa nui e haere nei i te iwi Māori i rote ngā tau nei. Ko ngā whakaaro, ko te maramatanga rāni o te mātauranga Māori, mo te whakaako, mo te whanga i te tangata. Ko rono atu au e kimi atu ana etahi whakaaro, etahi maramatanga, o roto anō ngā tikanga o ngā iwi, o ngā whare wānanga o mua, i etahi wāhi o etahi whakahaere Māori nei, kia kite e te tino whakaaro Māori mo te whakaako i te tangata. Hea tātou e whakaako nei i te tangata. Hea te tikanga, me pēhea te whakaako i te tangata. Hea ngā tikanga, hea ngā whakahaere e tika ana mo te whakaako i te tangata. Ine mea katona, hara au te tohonga mo tēnei tū āhuatanga, koina hui tētahi āhuatanga, ko tiro hia e ahau, i ahau aranga hau haere ana i te mātauranga Māori. Ana koina hui tētahi wā, ko ngā tikanga, ko ngā whakahaere, ko ngā kawarani mo te whakaako i te tangata. Nā i reira, ka puta taku whakaaro, ana ka wete hia tēnei whakaaro i roti tēnei haora, mo te kupu mana, mo te whakapae mea ana, mā te whakaako i te tangata e tupu ai te mana o te tangata. Te mana o tōna whānau, te mana o tōna iwi, i rā tū āhuatanga katoa. Tēnei rā tātou i ni rangi nei e mea ana ko te tikanga o te whakaako i te tangata, ke whiwhi te tangata, i tēnei mea te mātauranga. Engari ki te tirohia tātou i roti ki te mātauranga o mua, te mātauranga Māori o mua, karakau e pērā ana te whakaaro. Ko te whakaaro o mua, kia whāngaia te tangata, ki ngā kōrero o ngā mātua o ngā tūpuna ki ngā āhuatanga o te ao, e whiwhi ai i tētahi mana. E tia ho he māramatanga ki tōna ngākau, ki tōna wairua, ki tōna tinana, ka whiwhi i tētahi mana ka tai e tahi mea. Nā reira, ko te whakaaro o mua, hari te mea kia whakaakongia te tangata ko te mātauranga te take. Engari kia whakaakongia te tangata kia tupu te mana i roto iaia. Nā, he mana atua, he mana tupuna, he mana whenua. Koina hoki te hui katoa ko te mana tini o te tangata. Tāne atu, wahine mai, aha ko tāne, wahine, mana atua, mana tupuna, mana whenua, hui katoa tini ko te mana tini o te tangata. Nā, ko te tikanga, ko te kaupapa nui o te whakaako i te tangata, kia whakatupungia te mana i roti tau o tangatara, i roti te maiti, me tōna whānau, i roto hoki te tangata ko pakeke nei, i rā tū āhuatanga katoa. Nā mea anai, kona hoki te tino whakaaro, te tino māramatanga, i roto i ngā whakahaere whakaako tangata, i te mātauranga Māori o Mura. Nā kāti, he kupu whakataki i nei, i tēnei wāhanga kōrero ka huri atu au ki tērā o tātou reo, ke whakatakoto pēr i tahi whakaaro ki te reo ingarihi, ki te reo Pākehā. Kia ora tātou. Kia ora everybody. First of all, I just want to say a few introductory words and mihi in Māori and as word of thanks, first of all, to the organisers who have invited me to speak this morning and share some thoughts regarding mātauranga Māori and more specifically mātauranga Māori perspectives on teaching and on education and on learning. Now, so first of all, thanks for the invitation to share some thoughts. Thank you, Joe, for our karakia and Maria for the mihi this morning. I've been a researcher and thinker and explorer of mātauranga Māori for quite a long time now, and I'm a general researcher of mātauranga Māori, not a specific researcher of specific areas of mātauranga Māori. Unlike, say, someone like Rangi Mātāmua, who's specifically looking at tātai arorangi, te whare kōkōrangi, and going real deep in that particular application of mātauranga Māori. I've been looking more broadly across mātauranga Māori and looking at what are some of the principles and ideas and concepts that lie across mātauranga Māori as a whole, rather than in specific areas. However, I do dip into education because I come from, been involved in education a long time. I get involved in educational discussions a lot and try and explore the value or possibilities of mātauranga Māori in education settings. And I often come across this, are involved in these kinds of conversations. And so what I want to share with you today is some thoughts around what I call a mana-inspired approach to education, or to the education journey. And have think a little bit about that, and think about how that produces potentially a radically different idea about education than what we conventionally see in the in various education settings here in New Zealand. It starts from a very different base, as I was explaining in Māori just before, that the purpose of education is to foster the mana of the individual and their family around them. It's not about the acquisition of knowledge, but more about the fostering, the nurturing of mana that already exists inside the person. And I'll come back to a little bit about what that could mean. But first of all, just a few words about mātauranga Māori itself. Again, as I was explaining in English, mātauranga Māori are words that are not well known historically amongst our people. They're actually modern words. As I was explaining, they really have come into usage, high usage, since approximately 1980. And the reason for that is that this is the period in which we began to create kohanga reo through te whare wānanga. We began to create, well, we had the Māori language claim, which led to, for example, the establishment of the taurewhiri te reo Māori, te Māngai Pāho, eventually Māori television, things like this. And what this meant is that the claim system had to pay attention to a phenomena of knowledge rather than land claims, for example, or claims to resources. This was now a claim about the intangible aspects of our culture. And with the establishment of kohanga reo through te whare wānanga, these institutions are fundamentally about this thing we now call knowledge. And so mātauranga Māori, it's in this particular set of circumstances that the terms mātauranga Māori have become popular. And we tend to utilize the terms mātauranga Māori today to refer to a body of knowledge that nonetheless is very old. Even though the words mātauranga Māori are fairly new, they refer to some things that are very old indeed. And some of our traditions are very old. We know that their aspects of them are very old. And so this is why you can read literature since the 19th century about the meaning of whakapapa, or the meaning of mana, or karakia, or things of that kind. But you can't find much really about mātauranga Māori, the terms mātauranga Māori. Now, there are actually a couple of applications, but I won't quite go into those today. But the key point is that the terms mātauranga Māori are reasonably modern, but they're used to refer to some things that are very, very old and have been part of our tradition for a long time. A second important issue around the terms mātauranga Māori is that they really have, the terms mātauranga Māori really come about in response or in context to Pākehā society and culture and so on. They've been used to label a certain phenomena which we would call Māori knowledge, in the face of another phenomena called Pākehā knowledge or Western knowledge or something like that. So they really very much have meaning and significance in that context. Once you're in the house of mātauranga Māori, however, the terms become not so important. What we become more interested in is the richness of iwi hapu whānau traditions, for example. So it's natural for us to draw a word of caution to not mistake the doorway, which we might label mātauranga Māori, to the interior of the house, which is all of our different diverse traditions, that hold some similarities, but also some significant differences. Almost on a daily basis, I'm reminded about the richness that can be found inside iwi hapu whānau traditions, that some things we share across iwi, but there's some things that are particular to iwi, and particular to hapu, and particular to whānau. And that's the depth and richness that can be found in mātauranga Māori. So even though we might label this entire body of knowledge mātauranga Māori, we mustn't lose sight of the strength of the diversity within mātauranga Māori and across our various communities and so So that's just some introductory words about where these terms mātauranga Māori have come about and how they've become to be utilised. And they're very popular today. I'm writing a new book on mātauranga Māori, and I'm using the terms mātauranga Māori as an introduction to mātauranga Māori, but being really clear that this is really just the doorway into a much more complex reality of knowledge and experience and history and so on of the various iwi and hapu whānau traditions right across New Zealand. It's also helpful to talk about, to recognise, I think, that there is a generic kind of mātauranga Māori that's been emerging for some time now across the country. This is, it is somewhat mirrored in the kind of generic te reo Māori that has been growing for quite some time across Aotearoa and across the country. And I think that this is potentially to be encouraged and to be supported, but not to the degree to which we lose the diversity and the richness that can be found across diverse iwi hapu whānau communities. So again, it's another point that I'll be making in this new book around mātauranga Māori. So anyway, there's some introductory comments around mātauranga Māori. It's a big topic, fantastic topic, and we're all really interested in. Specifically, what we're interested in here in these discussions is what would mātauranga Māori, what are some of the thoughts or views or perspectives on education, on teaching and learning that we can find in mātauranga Māori that is helpful for us today going forward. And I want to, first of all, just start with some observations that one can take just by observing the Māori education settings today, and to highlight what appear to be quite critical features of those education settings, what are important in those settings, that are expressions of mātauranga Māori, but one doesn't necessarily need to go in depth into mātauranga Māori. One can just simply, if you look at a kura or look at a schooling situation, you look at a whare wānanga and so on, what are the features that appear to be important to those settings going forward? And it's worthwhile reflecting back to ourselves. Some of these, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, and that none of this is going to be entirely new. However, it's worthwhile just to quickly note these points anyway, and to remind ourselves. So one that's really important is the role and place of kaumātua, of elders in the lives of young people generally, and specifically in education settings, in the lives of our whānau and hapu. These are kaumātua who are wisdom keepers. This is really what kaumātua are really important for, is wisdom keepers. They're people who can marry up knowledge with experience and produce wisdom-filled perspectives on things that are really helpful to the young learner, to the young people, helpful to adults too. They're also what we would call mauri holders, and I stole this from Te Wānanga Ōrākua. There's a group of kaumātua at Te Wānanga Ōrākua called Ngā Purutanga Mauri. These are the people, elders, who really hold the mana, the authority, the character, the quality, the spirit, the ethos of an education setting. And sometimes they can be formalized, as in, say, for example, the Purutanga Mauri at Te Wānanga Ōrākua. But oftentimes they're not formalized. They are a group of people, one or two elders or kaumātua, kuia or koro or something, that have been present in a Māori education setting. And they're there not necessarily before their technical knowledge around mātauranga Māori or te reo Māori, although they might have that, but more to just hold the kaupapa, hold the space, be the bearer of the values of that space, provide guidance, provide encouragement, the occasional correction and crossword if it's required, but really the holders, the mauri holders of the education setting itself. I'm thinking kura, I'm thinking sometimes schools, I'm thinking koangareo, whare wānanga, also just education and teaching and learning settings upon our marae and so on. So first really important theme, again, this is really well known to all of us, but just repeating something we already know. the role and importance of kaumata, particularly as wisdom keepers, particularly as Māori holders, the ones that hold the Māori of a education setting. A second and really important feature of Māori education settings, and one it's arguable we've actually gone backwards on, is the importance of mentors. There are mentors are individuals who are mentoring individuals. There is a bit of a gender difference in the way these things operate. Men tend to look for proteges and women teach families. It's a bit of a generalization, but there is some truth in that. But because women do look for proteges too, but men often looking for proteges that they can craft and so on. It's a part of their control complex, perhaps, in some examples. But nonetheless, mentors are really important. They're really, really important. We do have a lot of self-created individuals in the Māori world who haven't been through the process of having their thinking critiqued by others and challenged by others in a mana-enhancing way. And it produces a different kind of individual than if you've got somebody who's been through a process of critique and challenge, shaping and crafting by loving people, by people who love them and take care of them and challenge them appropriately. I think mentors are a really, really, really important thing, and I think that they need to be. We've always kind of had a version of them, but I think it feels to me like the Māori world has had a bit of a step back. It's from a step backwards with this, and that it's something that we ought to rekindle again. It relates to the current issue we have around mana and authority in Mātauranga Māori today, which I can come back to. A third and really a critical feature of Māori education settings, those that, serious Māori education settings, is the role and importance of iwi hapu whānau in the life of the kura, the life of the koanga, the whiriwanga, and so on. That education is not, with young people, is not conducted disconnected from the iwi hapu whānau. This is really, this is a wisdom, of course, that many cultures understand and know, that the importance of iwi hapu whānau in the life of the kura. They bring colour, they bring energy, they bring life, they bring ethical context, they bring morality, they bring all sorts of leadership, they bring all sorts of value and strength, you might say, to a Māori education setting. So those first three are kind of all bound together. They're the importance of kaumātua, the importance of mentors, the role of iwi hapu whānau as the context within which a kura or Māori education setting ought to be conducted and is conducted. A fourth one is the value placed upon the revitalisation of te reo Māori and Mātauranga Māori, the repatriation of te reo Māori and Mātauranga Māori to Māori young people, to Māori people generally. This is very much a modern value. This is not a value that our tupuna 200 years ago would have ever been concerned about. But today we place a tremendous emphasis upon this, and rightfully so. The revitalisation, the repatriation of te reo Māori, Mātauranga Māori, iwi hapu whānau, kōrero stories and so on, to our people is a very important value to us today. We care a lot about this, and we want our kura and our Māori education settings to be serving this value as much as we possibly can. One of the issues, and I'm again come back to this one as well, issues is that the revitalisation of te reo Māori and Mātauranga Māori amongst Māori people, however, is not done merely for the purposes of revitalising te reo Māori and Mātauranga Māori. It's really about the liberation of the voice and the soul of a people. It's really about te reo Māori is not just that we can say in Māori what we would say in English anyway, but it is to find again a distinctive and powerful experience of life, an interpretation of life, and to articulate that through the uniqueness and distinctiveness of te reo Māori and Mātauranga Māori. So I don't agree with the planning which says the purpose of our kura is to have as many Māori language speakers as possible, or as many Māori equipped with mātauranga Māori as possible. Rather, what I do agree with is we have as many Māori learners as possible who are steeped in their identity and steeped in their ways of articulating themselves and their understanding of the world, by which they become positive contributors to life around them. It's a slightly different emphasis, and it leans into the topic that I'm particularly going to talk about, which is a mana-inspired approach to education. So that's four. This is just a brief overview, a brief survey. If you looked at Māori education settings today, what were their, what are the features? One final point, and this is my segue into the mana enhancing approach to education, is we very much are looking for students and for graduates of our Māori education settings who are harmonising of community around them. That is, they are aroha-filled people who can foster great relationships between themselves and others, who can address conflict and find resolution in mana-enhancing ways, and who have a certain skill in a certain area. They've achieved a certain authority and skill in a certain area. We generally, like anybody else, we don't like people who are really smart but are arrogant, and they haven't been rounded in their character to think about the implications of their work, the implications of their conduct and their knowledge to circumstances around them. They're more self-centered characters, and we don't particularly like that, and human communities don't particularly like that. We are looking for graduates out of our Māori education settings who do have skill in te reo Māori and mātauranga Māori. They do have prowess and they do have ability, but this is accompanied by a concern for others, a concern to serve life, a concern to foster great nourishing relationships between themselves and others. I mean, I'm talking about a bit of a superhuman person here, of course, but nonetheless, this is something we're seeking. They have skill and prowess, but it's accompanied by a degree of humility and a concern for life around them. So I use this expression, harmonizing of community around them. They're skillful people, they're brilliant at what they can do, they're knowledgeable and so on, and they have authority to do certain things, but they do it in a way that is harmonizing of life around them. The iwi hapu whānau, they bring real value and to the communities around them. So I've just seen this note here. E hoa mā, use your chance to put your questions forward to Charles, so pop them in the Q&A and I'll see if I can respond, and we'll see if we can respond to them in that. So I'm just going to speak for a little bit longer. If there are any comments or any thoughts or any questions, please do put them on the chat there, and I'll see if I can respond to them as best as I can. I just wanted to move on onto which is a particular topic that I have written about, and if you're interested, you can buy a report I wrote called "The Purpose of Education: Perspectives from Mātauranga Māori" from my website, and it's here that my first go at thinking about a mana-inspired approach to Māori education, or to education generally. And I'm just going to share with you some of the comments or thoughts around that. It's not a fully fledged philosophy by any stretch of the imagination. It's a bunch of ideas that have occurred to me that are relevant to education, that have occurred to me while I've been exploring mātauranga Māori and reading and wānanga and attending and going to all of these different things and going to hui all over the country and all of that kind of thing. These are some thoughts that have occurred to me that are relevant to the education journey. Now, one, which as I mentioned earlier, is that in mātauranga Māori, is mātauranga or knowledge is not the goal of the education journey, according to mātauranga. Rather, it is the fostering of the mana of the individual and their life around them. What is meant by this, and if I can explain very, very briefly, is that this expression we hear a lot called the manu e kai ana I te hua o te miro nōna te ngahere, ko te manu e kai ana i te hua o te mātauranga, nōna te ao, and so on and so forth. What this, this strikes me as a modern expression, not a classical, traditional expression. Where you see ideas about a traditional view of mātauranga Māori, you see it in oriori, in lullabies by mothers to their children. Actually, not just mothers, fathers do it too. What you see is this idea of expressions like e mau tō ringa ki te aka matua. It's not e mau tō ringa ki te mātauranga. It's e mau tō ringa ki te aka matua, ki pikitia e koe, ki te rangi tūhaha, te toi huare, so on and so forth. E ara wa hineata, kia tātai o ngutu ki te puhi ariki. These are the expressions that you find in our traditional literature about the mana of the man, the mana of the woman, the mana of humankind. And it's these things that I believe our traditional culture was yearning for. If we look in our traditional culture, it's almost always to do with something to do with mana of some kind or another. Everything is conceptualized in this idea of that mana can come forth into the world. Our creation stories, the arrival of the sun in the morning and the separation of earth and sky and te kore te pōki te ao marama and all of these are that's about the birth of mana into the world. And it becomes, that's the grand metaphor for all the kinds of ways mana can come into the world, such as the growth of the tree in the forest, the birth of the child in the whānau, and particularly the arrival of understanding in the mind, which is what we call maramatanga. And maramatanga is a particular kind of mana that we are trying to foster and bring forth into the consciousness and experience of our learners. Kia marama rātou ki etahi mea. Mā te maramatanga e tae ai hoki e rātou te etahi mea. Maramatanga is a kind of mana by which they understand something and they also receive a kind of authority to go and do something about that. Because they understand it, they now know they can do something about it. This is, for example, the tohunga whakaora. Ka titira te tohunga whakaora ki te mate o tētahi tangata. Ka tia ho e maramatanga ki roti ia, ka marama ia ki te mate. Ka marama hoki ia me pēhe ia e whakaora ai tērā tangata. So that's that combination of understanding and the authority to do something is two particular aspects of maramatanga. Now, we often talk about maramatanga in quite grand ways, you know, that the maramatanga I tau kia tāwhia, the maramatanga I tau kia te kōti arikirangi and so on. But we're also talking about the kind of maramatanga that everybody experiences. Aha ko paku, aha ko nui, te tiaho he maramatanga ki roti te ngākau, roti te wairo o te tangata, ka marama ia ki tētahi mea. And ultimately, that's the kind of mana that we're trying to achieve and foster and grow inside the person and through education. And the other one, which is very much important to us today in our culture today, is aroha. Is this relationship between it's aroha as a mana, and maramatanga and aroha working together as mana inside the person. So this is this idea of, you know, of a humble prowess, for want of a better term, or a loving prowess, a prowess that is harmonizing of community. Tai mai he maramatanga ki ai, ka aroha ia ki tētahi mea, ki tētahi tangata rānei, ka manaki tia, e ia. Taua tangata, taua kaupapa aha rānei. Now, just a word on the journey of mana, as you can see in our traditional knowledge. When something that our cultures, our communities did a lot, and we don't do it quite so much, is ka noho ngā kaumātua ki te tiro i a rātou, tamariki a rātou mokopuna. The elders of a community would sit and look and study the character, the nature of the young people, the children around them. And they say, oh, kare he taringa o tira, that one doesn't listen to anything, or he kakamanga whakaro o tira, that one is a fast thinker. O tira, he tērā ko tōia ki te moana, that one has been drawn towards the ocean. Things of this kind. They look and study the character and the nature and the qualities emanating out of the children of their own family or the wider hapu or so on. And what this has said is that this is they would debate these characters, and this was the expression, the experience of an atuatanga that's naturally coming forth into that child without any education, without any teaching whatsoever. This is what is called, this is what was traditionally meant by Māoritanga. Where te mana e put the Māori ana I roti tētahi tangata, the Māori tanga o tētahi tangata, is what was naturally occurring and so on. And the kaumātua debate and so on, that, well, this one's been drawn to the ocean, or this one is like this, or drawn to the ngahere or something, or this person is like this and like that. It meant they were debating which atua was expressing itself naturally into this particular child, into this particular mokopuna. The next thing that they would do is then say, well, if this is what this atua is katohia, tērā tamai tiraro I tērā atua. They would then dedicate and baptize that child to that atua. And then they would embark on a long journey of knowledge and understanding about that particular atuatanga. Ka whakakungia rātou, ka whāngaia te tamaitira ki ngā kete, ki ngā kōrero, o roto ngā kete mō tērā atua. And they were dedicated to the atua, and they were taught all the existing knowledge about that particular atua. The final part, and I'm summarizing very, very quickly here. This is a real brief overview of it. The final part is when you get to the stages of the tohungatanga. And that is, the tohunga is not somebody who's greatly expert at something. That's not what makes a tohunga. Although they usually are. They usually are somebody who's greatly expert. But the tohunga is one who is truly in the grip of the atuatanga, and they are able to summon their particular mana at will and be able to understand something and bring about new realizations and new possibilities. A tohunga is a fundamentally creative person, not someone who merely administers rituals. That's not what a tohunga is. But ultimately, what a tohunga is to summon, and the tohungatanga of the individual is the ability who can bring forth the mana e puta Māori ana I roti a rātou, and by which they can bring forth new understandings and possibilities. This was the purpose of the examination of the final examination of the whare wānanga, where students who had been dedicated to their particular atua were sent into the environmental areas of those atua. If it's in the ocean, they're up on the ocean. If they're drawn to the harakeke or hene te iwi, they were taken to the paharakeke. And they were not to return to the whare wānanga until some kind of new and original thought had arrived in the minds of that student. And when that new and original thought, upon the meditation in that place, that had undertaken whakatiki, which is fasting, and nohopuku, which is meditation, to bring forth an illumination, a maramatanga, a new idea, a new possibility. And then they would come back to the teachers, there to be tested, and where that person had to present their new idea, their insight, their innovation, present that insight to the teachers, to the tohunga, the teachers. And if they agreed that this was genuinely a new understanding that had come into the mind of that person, then ko tohungatia. Ko tohungia te wairua, ko tohungatia. They have become the vessel, truly, of the mana of that particular atua inside that person. Now, this is lots more to say about all of that, but this is the ideas bubbling away inside our traditional mātauranga Māori approaches to education, in our tohungatanga, in our whanaungatanga, in our whare wānanga and so on. It strikes me that this is such a really interesting set of ideas and wisdom for us to be thinking about our Māori education settings today. And that is that, first of all, studying what naturally comes out. E puta Māori ana I roti ngā tātou tamariki. What naturally comes out of them. We live in an education system where we have authorities who credit the body of knowledge, the curriculum, that we then have to pass to the children. And it's a kind of a one-size-fits-all approach. This is a classic Western cosmopolitan system of education. I call it the drive-by shooting approach, where basically you put kids in a classroom, I'm the teacher, I've got all this curriculum, and I basically hammer curriculum at them and so on. It's certainly, that's what I used to do at Tawana when I grew up. Anyway, whereas this system is, you have to study first and foremost what's naturally occurring in those children. What naturally is coming in out of them, what's bubbling naturally, and then harness that and take curriculum to that, not just whoever comes through the door, we're just going to give them everything that we think that they need. So it's a very different place to start. A second thing is that as the education journey is proceeding, there is as much attention paid to the character and the qualities and the weight of the individual as there is to the acquisition of knowledge and the technical understanding of things. Now that's important. Technical understanding is really important. You got to know how to do certain things. It's really important. But there's an equal emphasis upon what is going on with this person. How are they growing as a person? How they just something's come up. I just want to make sure I got it right. Yeah, is an attention paid to the wairua, to the qualities inside of that person as well. And a third thing, of course, we can talk a lot about is therefore the place of tapu and mauri in the learning journey. Tapu to do with the commitments and dedications that need to be applied in a consistent manner in order for that child to become a true vessel of the mana that naturally is in them. Mauri is you've got to take care of the physical body, you've got to take care of the naturally occurring energies of the person. If a person is not eating well, not sleeping well, not taking care of themselves, and so on, and their physical body is not being cared for, well, that doesn't set the right circumstances for mana to flow inside the person. One of the critical things, two really important things about mana, which we all know, is that one is you can't direct mana to do any, just like you can't tell a tree grow now and grow precisely to this height and grow precisely in this way. You can't do, it's the same with mana. You can't actually finally control mana. All you can do is set the conditions and circumstances whereby it flows. And by setting those conditions, you actually do achieve a degree of mastery. But it's not directly upon mana itself, it's on the circumstances around it. Just like you tend to a tree in the forest or plants in the garden or something, you've got to set the circumstances. You've got to get the mauri right. You've got to get the tapu right. You've got to get all of the other care around it right, and the mana will grow. If you think about mana in the terms of manamatanga in the life and the consciousness of the student, that's the mana you're trying to grow inside your students. So you got to set the right conditions around them. But first and foremost, you got to understand what is the mana of the individual that's come before you anyway. What is naturally going on inside their hearts and minds, and that needs to be harnessed and nurtured. Maria. So I'll stop now.
Aha koe ka tae e tātou te whakarongo mo te roanga o te rā, e mohi ana e kore e tae te whakarau atu ngā kōrero katoa i tēnei wā poto, whoi anō he pātai kua puta, hei whakautu mau, ko te pātai tuatahi, tērā pia I whakamahia he kupu ke atu, nā reira ki tō whakaaro, no tua whakarere tēnei momo te mātauranga Māori.
Ko te kupu mātauranga Māori, no nena he noiho nei. Engari e hāngai ana ki e tahi taonga o namata noa atu nei.
Kia ora, māma noiho te whakautu. Ko te pātai tuarua, what about non-Māori learners of te reo? What are the mana enhancing parameters for such learners?
Mana enhancing parameters, it really depends on those individuals who are involved in this journey. If we apply this model that I've just discussed very, very briefly, which is about how te mana e puta Māori ana I te rā tangata, which is about skills and talent and qualities and characters and stuff like that. It really depends on what is going on in the lives of these individuals that are in front of you in the classroom and setting the mana enhancing strategies, you might say, for that purpose.
Mm. Hei tāpiri ki tērā pātai, as a kaiako of te reo myself, I find that my non-Māori students are more in that tapu space than perhaps the Māori students in terms of their commitment and therefore excel. So how do we encourage our Māori learners of te reo Māori to bring that same commitment?
Well, that's a big question, and it's a complex question. It's not easily answered. For some Māori, they take te reo Māori very seriously indeed, but for a lot of Māori, there isn't that same degree of seriousness, and I'm wondering if that is actually connected to perceptions they might hold about Māoritanga generally and about the Māori world generally. We do know that some Māori have very poor views of the Māori world and do not expect wonderful and great things from Māori life and from Māori stuff. I don't know if this is answering your question, Maria, but I wonder whether the lack of seriousness in learning te reo Māori is actually connected to own issues around identity and a lack of seriousness about Māori things generally.
Ai, marama puana ki tērā āhuatanga. Would it be fair to say that an adjusted mana enhancing approach is required when enhancing adults and working alongside parents? And this pātai from one of our participants is thinking about their own experience of success with students who are youth, children, but find resistance with the Pākehā in the space. Or can this approach work across all age groups?
Well, I think it ought to. I don't know the answer to that question, to tell you the truth, Maria, because we're really right at the very beginnings of thinking about what this might look like. We've been so dominated by Māori language and cultural revitalisation, which is really important, which is that we've been preoccupied to increase the numbers of people who speak te reo Māori, to increase the numbers of people who know about mātauranga Māori, their own iwi, hapu, whānau, whakapapa and stuff like that. We're only really at the very beginnings of, well, what would a mātauranga Māori inspired education system actually look like? And how would people actually be different as a consequence of going through such a thing? How would life be improved? How would education be improved in this sense? And one of the things I like about this whole idea of a mana inspired approach to education is it looks at the whole person. It doesn't look at them just as functionaries, emerging from an education system and then going into the labor market or something like that. It's looking at the whole person and as a vessel or vehicle of creativity, of possibility, of positive contribution to the world. And so I don't finally have an answer to that question, Maria, because I think we're right at the very beginning of exploring what this all actually means.
Tēnā koe. This pātai from Emerson Nikora, ko ana kōrero, a great perspective on Māori educators helping tangata understand true manaakitanga. Ko tana pātai, normalising Māori reo and culture in mainstream kura, how can we help support develop tumuaki, heads of kura, Māori, Pākehā, to add changes to strategic plans, building deeper traction to develop the iwi, hapu, whānau, using Māori values?
Well, that's a big question, and I don't actually work in the schooling system or the kura system and so on. So, my comments will be, may not be quite so helpful. But one of the things I would suggest is that there needs to be some kind of common understanding of, if we're going to introduce a mātauranga Māori approach to teaching and learning, to pedagogy, curriculum and so on, we need to have a kind of a common understanding of the place we're starting from and what we're trying to achieve over time. One of the problems I think we find in many of our settings, and it's what my book is going to address, so hopefully anyway, is that we don't really have a common shared language around mātauranga Māori when we take it into kura. Lots and lots of people have lots and lots of different perspectives, and so conversations and discussions in wānanga don't necessarily, they don't become as productive as they might be, because people are working from different points. But if there's a kind of a shared understanding at te ina kura, when we say mātauranga Māori, this is what we mean. We don't care what Charles Royal means. This is what we mean, and this is the foundation we're going to build on. You know what I mean? So I think that was one thing, is building a kind of a common shared understanding of where we are at, what's really going on for us. When we're using or approaching Mātauranga Māori, this is what we mean, this is what we're trying to achieve, rather than this kind of fragmented understandings that do happen in various settings. Now, I hope that's helpful. Yeah.
No play. And probably leading on from that question, and this will be the last part, I just want to let the participants know that you can direct your questions directly to Charles through the app and put your questions there. So to close off our Q&A session with this final question, and I think it's a little bit of a difficult one, but providing a kind of a common language in terms of Mātauranga Māori, and how we can communicate this through what we do. This pātai from Lucia, how do we teach this way when there are so many constraints put on us?
Well, I'm a great fan. I don't know if the person posing the question works in kura or not, or is working in the mainstream system. It is a struggle. It is a struggle, and there are real issues. However, I feel that we've got to somehow walk down this track anyway. And you do see some elements in some of our kura and some of our whatuwānanga and so on that's already taken place. So one real thing is conduct your classes in places of significance to your iwi hapu whānau community. Not inside these neutral looking boxes that we love to create called classrooms. Take your kids first and foremost. Yesterday, I was fortunate to go onto the Kaimai Ranges and to look at some whenua there and stuff like that. And it just reminds you, it's so important going to places of iwi hapu whānau and allow, first of all, that to be your teacher. First and foremost, let the whenua be your teacher. First and foremost, as much as you're able, and try and find. Perhaps try and find ways of advancing the curriculum you're supposed to be imparting to your students through the mechanism of the whenua, or wāhi tapu, or marae, or things of that kind. If you happen to be in the city and you can't be in whenua and stuff like that, there are still places that can go on. The moana, go onto the moana, go into go into parks, go into regional parks and things like that. So that might be one particular way, but I recognise it is difficult. It is difficult, but we need to open up a space within our Māori education world where we can really go deep on this and really explore this whole idea of a mana-inspired approach to education.
Mai ora